Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 127 of the Trading Without Borders podcast with Omobi, your host. Sincere apologies for the past 2 or 3 weeks. I haven't released episodes on the podcast. Yeah, this is due to some ongoing works behind the scene. So we will resume fully in the coming weeks. For today's episode, we will continue our discussions on the AfCFTA Digital Trade Protocol. That's the draft Digital Trade Protocol. And we are looking at the data governance provisions on cross-border data transfers and protection of personal data. But before taking a deep dive into this is what we're going to be discussing in the next few weeks before we look at other provisions. But before we start with this today, let's look at some recent developments in digital under the AfCFTA digital trade. Okay, so the first one, recently the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments of the African Union adopted 8 annexes to the Protocol on Digital Trade, and they include their rules of origin, digital identities, cross-border digital payment, cross-border data transfers, legitimate public interest reasons for source code, online safety and security, emerging technologies, and fintech, that's financial technology. Okay, so this is a great development. As these annexes are released, then we will examine the provisions and see what are the provisions in terms of enhancing digital trades across Africa and reducing the barriers as much as possible, the barriers to digital trade, and how it unlocks the benefits of the AfCFTA digital trade. Okay, so let's also another development which we should also look at. The AU endorsed, that's it designated Nigeria as the AfCFTA digital champion. That's for Nigeria's role in promoting digital enterprise and innovation. So congratulations to Nigeria on this. And let's move into today's discussion. We will consider cross-border data transfer under data governance and, of course, protection of personal data as well. I mentioned earlier that the 8 annexes were adopted by the African Union, that's Heads of State and Government of the African Union. So this is in respect of the regulations under the draft AfCFTA Digital Trade Protocol. The data governance provisions, which provides under Article 20, that's for cross-border data transfers, it provides that the state party subject to an annex on cross-border data transfer, they shall allow cross-border data transfer, including personal data, by electronic means, provided the activity is for the conduct of digital trade by a person of a state party. So what does this mean for you as an individual or an enterprise or an organization that is involved in digital trade? So, for example, for me as an individual, if I'm engaged in digital trade or e-commerce transaction and I'm expected to fill in some information, and sometimes you see some information that is really not necessary for in terms of, I feel not all anyway, and you're wondering why are they collecting this? So, but at the cost, you're also open to thinking that I hope this is going to be protected and it's safe, not just somebody collecting personal data about me and they're being careless with it. But what is expected of you as an organization in terms of collection of data? What are your legal obligations? What do you do? Are you just collecting data for the sake of collecting it? What are you expected as an organization in terms of managing, handling, and ensuring the security of this data? Because you want to do cross-border data transfers, because you're going to be interacting, even in terms of provision of services, not necessarily only goods. But the example I'm using is in terms of e-commerce. How are you expected to treat the data of people that you are providing goods or services for? So that is one of two. In the by the time we get to see the annex on cross-border data transfer, we'll get more details on that. Then also the provision also allows state parties to adopt measures that are inconsistent in allowing cross-border data transfer, provided it is for a legitimate public policy objective or to protect essential security interests, as long as the measures are not applied in a discriminatory manner or is meant to serve as some sort of disguised restriction to digital trade. So then finally the third paragraph says that the annex on cross-border data transfer shall, amongst others, set out legitimate public policy objectives, how data may be used, referring to my initial example of how data is being collected by organizations. So what is your obligations in terms of treatment of data of subjected and natural persons or companies that are interacting with you? What is your obligations in terms of treating those the data that you collect? Then the provision also, the annex on cross-border data is also meant to make provisions on restrictions on sharing of data to third parties, because you can imagine sometimes you submit your data or you do some transaction, the next few weeks you are receiving some emails marketing it to from organizations or from individuals you did not sign up to, and you're wondering, how did they get my data? So are you, as an organization dealing with them, expected to just transfer data that you collect? No, there are restrictions, there are regulations and rules in terms of treatment of data. So we will look at that in more detail. Then let's look at protection of personal data. So each state party shall adopt or maintain a legal framework that provides for the protection of personal data of natural persons engaged in digital trade. So there are regulations in different state parties in terms of data protection. So we are in the coming weeks as well. That's also what we are going to be looking at data protection regulations of various state parties, comparing and also making recommendations on how they can be harmonized and what can be done to help in reducing the barriers to digital trade in terms of those regulations. Because as much as we all want to do digital trade, there may be some restrictions if you have to looking at different regulations, complying with various regulations in terms of cross-border data transfer. How can we harmonize those regulations for effective digital trade? So we're looking at that. So each state party is also expected in developing in the development of the legal framework, take into account the relevant principles, guidelines adopted by regional, continental, and international organizations. So what are best practice provisions in terms of developing data protection regulations? And state parties are also expected to publish information on laws and regulations on personal data protections in terms of digital trade. How can a natural person pursue a remedy? Can you take legal steps in terms of dealing with wrongful use of your data? What are the provisions available for you? Are there legal steps that you can take? Are there complaints measures or complaint provisions that how can you possibly make a complaint or institute, maybe in terms of taking legal steps of instituting legal proceedings among others? And you as an enterprise, how are you expected to comply with any legal requirement in terms of treatment of data? So state parties are also to require enterprises in this territory to adopt, maintain, and publish their policies and procedures related to protection of personal data. So I will stop here. We will discuss more in subsequent episodes. And as usual, the podcast is for educational purposes only. If you need expert advice or you want more information on entering or accessing various African markets, please reach out to me. My name is Omobola Adekola on LinkedIn, and until next week, I say to you, bye-bye.